Hey, future fans of Homer. This is a video with some quick tips for how to read Homer's Iliad. It's for my incoming first-year students in the Torrey Honors College, where the first thing we read is Homer's Iliad, and you pretty much have to read it on your own before you show up for college. And I know that puts a lot of pressure on you. So I just wanted to give you 5 quick tips for a good first read-through of the Iliad. All right. Number 1, imagine that you believe this book. I don't mean that you have to like convert to the religion of pagan Greece and believe in the Homeric Olympian deities, but I do want to warn you against coming at this with your own presuppositions and saying, well, I know Homer says this, but what's really going on is this other thing. I just want to encourage you to open your mind and embrace the story as Homer tells it. Don't put yourself in a position over the book. Stand under the book. It's your best chance to understand the book. This is a strategy for how to get the book into your mind well. You are entirely free to make a judgment afterwards and reject critically certain presuppositions of the book. But as you're taking the book in, your best shot at understanding it intelligently is to open your imaginative faculties to take in what Homer is teaching you. It's a good story. It's a ripping good yarn, but it is also instruction from a great mind, the mind of Homer. Second tip, listen to the Iliad's music. And this does mean don't listen to other music. The Iliad is poetry. It's epic poetry. It's got a particular flow and rhythm and kind of a beat or cadence in the original Greek. Our translator, Lattimore, from this 1951 translation we use, has chosen a very free kind of a line, but if you attend to the way the lines play out, you'll hear gradually a kind of a 6-beat. It's not forced, it's not sing-songy, but there's a kind of a 6-beat rhythm that naturally flows with the way the words sound, that flows into the next line, that flows into the next line. That sort of epic flow is crucial to getting your mind and your heart and your ears and even your body aligned with what's going on in Homer's narrative. This is not a novel. It's more like lyric poetry that you might have read. It's more like song lyrics in some ways. So I know you may study with background music. Don't do it when you're reading poetry. Let the poetry give you the music. It's going to take some silence. Oh, one thing you might want to do here is when you get lost in the lack of rhythm, when you can't hear the music at all, read a little bit of it out loud. Just kind of jumpstart your ears. It is a physical process reading this book. Third tip, invest in some favorite scenes. Your assignment is to read the whole thing cover to cover. Don't show up for class without having read the whole book. Now, you might have read it poorly, you might have read it fast, etc., but it's a starting condition that you have read the book before we begin to discuss it together in seminar. But even though coverage is your goal, you're allowed to have favorites. So if something really stands out to you, go back to that scene and read it a few times. I'm serious. In a perfect world, you could read the Iliad several times and really digest it before beginning to discuss it with colleagues. This is not a perfect world. You don't have all the time in the world, but do keep your eye out for things you like as you go through and privilege those. Go back to them, read them more carefully. If you have a favorite scene, it's a couple pages long, and you read it 5 times, you're kind of a miniature expert in that scene. And the things you know from that scene will inform the other scenes that you haven't invested in. So find a favorite and do more with it. That includes in your pre-class notes. Take more notes on one section and don't worry about having the same depth or quantity of notes across the entire 24 books. Pick a section you like, dig deeper in it. Don't be consistent. Go on and just take lighter notes on the rest of it. Fourth one is annotate, and I'm going to give you 3 subpoints here on this tip. Annotate. Things to mark as you read through your book. This physical printed book is a tool for getting the ideas and the poetry into your mind. One thing that you'll want to mark is this action summary, and I say per page. So as you're reading through these, you've got about 500 pages here. Something happens on each page. Now, it might just be Achilles is still talking. I advise you to write that at the top of your page. Achilles is still talking. Turn the page. Achilles finally stops talking. Next page. Agamemnon's mad at Achilles. That's it. I'm not talking about brilliant summary. I just mean a quick action summary of what happens on that page. You will find, unless you do that, you'll find it's very hard to look at any given page and know what's going on. Your little running summary at the top will be a great navigation tool. Also, you can make a little index in the back of the book of what happens in each book, each of the 24 books of the book, the Iliad. Yeah. Oh, and I mark on the edges of my book as well so that I can quickly flip to whichever book I want. Second thing to mark is the speeches and which characters are speaking. The Iliad is 60% character speech. That's not an optical illusion. You're really hearing that much character dialogue. And the dialogue tends not to be back and forth conversational so much as it is long set speeches, almost performances in many cases. I'm a comic book fan, so I use a comic book notation style to mark which character is speaking. I will circle the entire speech, even if it's 3 pages long, and I'll draw a little word balloon handle coming out to the margin, and I'll write the speaker's name in it. So throughout my copy of the Iliad, sorry, it's backwards there, but maybe you can see that I've got little word balloons coming off and just helping me find that text and say, that's an Athena text, that's her speech. The other thing that you're going to want to mark is similes. So 60% of the Iliad is character speech. The other 40% is the narrator. And the narrator he's a sly dog. He's kind of background. It's hard to get the narrator. We can call him Homer, but just remember we're talking about Homer, the narrator voice that you hear setting things up. He doesn't show his cards very often. What he does show you is he gives you these epic similes, like bees released from a buzzing hive, so the Achaeans descended on Troy, something like that. There are 180 of those similes. We call them epic similes. And these are really points in the Iliad where instead of just being on the battlefield of Troy, you're getting 180 little vignettes or scenes or open windows into other parts of life. I mean, we could say of Greek culture or whatever, but I mean just life, just stories about gardening and how animals act and how people behave when they're not on the battlefield fighting for their lives. So you're going to want to mark those similes. I always circle the as at the beginning and then draw a little arc down to so, because in Lattimore's translation, he follows that formula almost always. And most of the similes are, a couple lines long. Some of them are more extended, but you will want to mark all of those. They give a lot of color and flavor to the book. Okay, last element I want to talk about is don't dwell on distracting details. Here I'm tipping my hand. If you hadn't noticed the fact that my 5 tips are spelling out Iliad yet, I doubled down on the D's here to show you don't dwell on distracting details. That is to say, you're taking notes on this book before class. If your notes are about 50 pages long, that's way too long. Now you need notes summarizing your notes because your notes alone are now a literary production that takes some time to navigate through. So you're going to have to make command strategic decisions about what you're capturing. And you might think it's cool to write down every character, where they're from and how they die, but somewhere around book 19, you're going to realize that was a bad plan. My notes are swelling up to a proportion that is unhelpful. And these details turn out not to be helpful. Again, don't be a completist. If you feel like you have to do a family line of some kind to figure out how, say, Agamemnon is related to certain other people, do that, but don't be a completist about it. Don't decide you've now got to draw every family tree for everyone out to the final degree. The other thing I should say about don't dwell on distracting details is book 2 is practically designed to break you of that temptation. When the narrator summons the muse to empower him to name every ship and all the people in all of them, that's your clue to not try to capture everything. It's an astonishing feat of memory and performance that the narrator pulls off, but you do not have to perform a corresponding feat of note-taking. Book 2 of the Iliad, the recitation of the ships, is sort of like the Leviticus of reading through the whole Bible. Everything's going along fine in Genesis. Exodus is pretty cool. And then you hit Leviticus and think, I need a different plan because the the gripping narrative is not here. It's all important, but it's a different kind of important. Book 2 should alert you to the fact that you need to make some big decisions about what to write down and what not to write down. The goal is to read the book, not merely to skim it, but there are different speeds of reading that still count as actual reading. And when you get into a recitation of details, you know that that's where you are. So those are my tips for how to read Homer's Iliad. A lot of these tips sort of emphasize a quick time management strategy for making sure you make it through the book well. But the goal is not to read books fast, right? The goal is to read books. And so I hope that these tips will equip you to have your first good reading of the Iliad. Thanks a lot.